Hey guys, how's it going? This is Watch, and in this video we're doing a direct hands-on comparison between the new BlackBerry Passport and the Apple iPhone 6 Plus. Now, these two phones are pretty similar in terms of where they come from. They're obviously made completely differently by completely different people. The only real similarity is they're made by a manufacturer that both controls their hardware and software, which kind of makes this an interesting comparison. Obviously, in terms of form factor and design, they're really quite worlds apart. But if you're interested in how these two smartphones compare against each other, all things considered, or even considering buying one of these phones, this is a perfect comparison for you. So stay tuned and we'll figure out which one is best for you. Now, the first thing that we're going to take a look at is the overall form factor and physical size differences between these two devices. Starting with the iPhone 6 Plus, it measures about 158.1 millimeters in terms of its height and about 77.8 millimeters in terms of its width. Now, on the BlackBerry Passport side, it measures about 128 millimeters in terms of its height and about 90.3 millimeters in terms of its width. In terms of thickness, the iPhone is certainly a lot thinner than the BlackBerry, only measuring about 7.1 millimeters compared to the BlackBerry's 9.3 millimeters. Now, in terms of weight, even though the iPhone is larger in terms of its physical dimensions, it still manages to keep its weight pretty low at only 172 grams versus the BlackBerry Passport's 194 grams. Now, aside from the physical dimensional differences, in terms of design, obviously they're going for a different philosophy in both phones. BlackBerry has kind of magnified its tradition of keeping a square device with a physical keyboard. Obviously, one of its main highlights over here about this new BlackBerry phone is that it does have a large, high-resolution display as well as a full-size keyboard. Obviously, you're missing the number pads and some of the punctuation marks that you would typically find in a full-size BlackBerry keyboard, but it definitely has most of the essentials, and then anything extra it'll display on the screen. Now, in terms of the build quality itself, I do have to say that the Passport is made quite well. It's very sturdy. It doesn't flex at all, even though it's kind of a large footprint, and the overall feel in the hand is kind of awkward, especially if you've never used a phone in kind of this kind of form factor. I do have to say it's comfortable, a little bit awkward at times. It's very wide compared to the iPhone 6 Plus, which a lot of iPhone users kind of feel that it is awkward as well, but because of its larger size. But I do have to say that ergonomically, I do prefer obviously the iPhone's shape. It's something that I'm much more used to, but I do like the physical keyboard as well. It's something that a lot of people are used to, and they can certainly type faster than any virtual keyboards. But these days, with all these options with the OS keyboard being really good, as well as third-party keyboards being excellent as well, the typing speeds these days are pretty comparable to each other. It's just what you're used to and what you kind of personally prefer. In my instance, since I'm used to these days on a more virtual keyboard, that's kind of what I prefer. But after about a couple of days of usage on this thing, I do really love the physical haptic feedback that you get and the overall tactile sensations of actually using physical keys. So something definitely to take a note of. In terms of durability, the materials used to make this BlackBerry are primarily high-quality polycarbonate plastics, and you can see that there's actually a metal band around it, which kind of makes the phone look premium, and it also gives us a nice premium feel. The buttons feel really good, and obviously besides the kind of awkward kind of hand that you have to make to kind of reach all the buttons, using it with one hand is certainly possible as well if you have a little bit of a larger to medium sized hands. The iPhone is obviously extremely well built, made with real quality aluminum products. Obviously these days, if you haven't already, the 6 Plus has this known issues with some models having the tendency to be a little bit flexible and bending. Obviously, to make this phone only 7.1 millimeters in terms of thickness and still having this large kind of screen size, they really can't make this thing out of titanium, so the aluminum can bend. In my personal experience, even if you're wearing really tight jeans and putting it in your back pocket, I haven't found any bending issues. Obviously, if you're going to put the entire weight of a gorilla on either sides of these phones, you're definitely going to have some issues with bending, but for normal every day-to-day use, I think this is a very durable product and very well built in terms of longevity and should last a long time alongside with the BlackBerry. Now there are a couple of selections of the iPhone in terms of different colors and different memory sizes. Obviously internal memory is not expandable, unlike the BlackBerry, which has actual expandable memory. If you lift this flap open, you get a micro SD expansion slot right there, which you can upgrade the memory up to 64 gigabytes, which is fantastic. You have your SIM card slot over there as well. But in order to get different sizes on the iPhone, you're obviously going to have to select whether you want the 16 gig, the 64 gig, or the 128 gigabyte model. Now let's jump ahead and talk about the displays in both these two devices. Starting with the iPhone 6 Plus, it has an all-new 1920 by 1080 IPS display. It's LED backlit. It's a very nice display. It actually has a polarizing layer on top of the glass, so if you use it in brightly lit sunlight conditions, it's probably one of the best phones I've ever used in daytime conditions. It has really, really minimal glare. Now the BlackBerry Passport is also using an IPS LCD capacitive touchscreen, which obviously has multi-touch and everything like that. But it has a symmetrical screen with a resolution of 1440 by 1440, and it is a 4.5-inch screen. And it has a PPI about 453, which is certainly higher than the 401 PPI on the iPhone 6 Plus. In terms of image quality themselves, both phones are really comparable to each other. I don't think that the BlackBerry Passport has really any negative flaws in terms of the image quality and accuracy and overall experience you get with the screen experience. The only big downside is obviously that square symmetrical aspect ratio. You don't really get a full screen experience when you're watching traditional high definition content, and of course movies and TV shows and YouTube videos always will have big bars at the top and bottom of the screen, even if you rotate it to its landscape orientation. Internally, both these two devices are running on completely different architecture. Obviously Apple is running the new A8 dual-core processor from Apple. It is a dual-core processor that's clocked in about 1.4 gigahertz, and it is a ARM-based architecture. The BlackBerry is running Qualcomm Snapdragon 801 chip. That's a quad-core processor clocked in about 2.26 gigahertz. And in terms of overall RAM, we have 1 gigabyte on the 6 Plus and whopping 3 gigabytes on the BlackBerry Passport, which is certainly quite a bit. And thanks to its multitasking capabilities, you're really going to take advantage of all that RAM, which is quite awesome. Now, in order to quickly test the internal specs and how these two perform, we're going to go ahead and launch Geekbench 3, which is hopefully going to give us a good idea in terms of what these two can do in terms of internal processing. So let's go ahead and run the benchmark and see what we get. Now, as you can see from the results, the BlackBerry definitely didn't do a bad job, but that new A8 processor that's in the new 6 Plus is certainly a powerhouse. Even though it's a dual-core processor, it can really surpass what any Snapdragon 801 chip is doing right now, even though this is still a quad-core processor. So as you can see, we almost have a 3,000 points on the multi-core compared to 2,400, almost 2,500 there, and almost double the performance on the single-core score. Now, certainly one thing I have to mention is that even though we got a much higher score on Geekbench 3 on the new 6 Plus, I think the BlackBerry is really optimized for its own processor. It's running its own native OS. And in terms of overall usage, it's a very, very fast phone. Everything is very snappy. There's no really lag in anything you do in terms of applications. And all of its functionality and everything really works quite well. And I never feel that it's an inferior product in terms of its internal specification. It's really powered quite generously. And it's the same case with the new iPhone 6 Plus, because it's running its own custom OS by the manufacturer. The operating system really does a great job with harmoniously making everything really fast and very fluid with the new A8 processor. So in both regards, I think they're really on par with each other in terms of internal performance. Now, in terms of connectivity, both phones have the latest generation of Wi-Fi connectivity. They both have dual band 5 gigahertz and 2.4 4 gigahertz frequencies for all your Wi-Fi bandwidths, and they also have AC compatibility. So if you have the latest generation AC networks at your home or at your office, they're all connected to those higher-end, faster speed networks. In terms of LTE, again, both phones have the latest bands for LTE standards as well as the latest generation Bluetooth, and they both have NFC. And BlackBerry and Apple have their own respective way for you to actually use them as wallets. So if you want to use your credit cards or your debit cards, they both have services where you can upload your information there and use the NFC chips to make your transactions. Now the next thing that we're going to do is just a quick sound test to try out to see what the internal speakers sound like in an every day-to-day experience. We're just going to play some music on both phones and see how they sound. Now, just reviewing those clips, I do have to say that the Passport and the 6 Plus do an excellent job of maintaining a pretty good fidelity considering how small those internal speakers are. And I definitely have to say they're above average in smartphones in these kind of categories. Most smartphones have a real tinny sound. A lot of them cannot represent any type of bass or any kind of punch whatsoever. But these definitely have an excellent volume and overall clarity that's certainly ahead of what a lot of smartphones are. Now, if I were to pick one over the other, it would be difficult. But I definitely have to say that the BlackBerry does an excellent job in reproducing a lot of those mid-range frequencies with a decent amount of bass. And I think the iPhone 6 Plus has a little bit more treble in it, but I would have to say if I had to pick one over the other just to listen to music, I really wouldn't. I would plug in a pair of headphones or external speakers, but if I had to choose, I would choose the BlackBerry Passport. Now let's talk about some of the special features that comes in each phone. Now this is a huge topic over here. We can really be here talking for days about the individual features of the OS and the hardware. But just to sum up some of my favorite features on each phone, starting with the BlackBerry, obviously it has that physical keyboard, which is a big difference from pretty much all of these smartphones. A funny thing is, back probably about 10 years ago or even more, if you take a look at what was considered a smartphone, it would look very similar to this rather than this. But obviously the iPhone back in 2007 changed all that, and now most phones look like this. But getting back to the BlackBerry special features, I do have to say that the OS, it's running the latest generation of BlackBerry's own OS, which is 10.3, and they're doing a good job of maturing the OS. I think it's really paired well with the hardware. The overall fluidity and the overall experience that you get is really harmoniously working together. One of my favorite features is obviously the hub, which is very accessible and it has gesture modes. And here you can check out most of your notifications and everything like that. But one real cool feature is they have actually had some sensors over here, either be capacitive touch, where you can actually scroll and use the keyboard itself and just surface scroll over different things, which is really quite handy and very intuitive. I definitely have to give it to whoever came up with this idea. It feels really, really nice to use. You also have quick notifications up there like you have on most modern day smartphones. Additionally, you also have voice commands over here. If you hold that button down there, you can actually activate BlackBerry's own voice command system and ask some simple questions. What's the weather like right now?
The weather in Cloverdale, Canada on Monday is some clouds and 58 degrees.
It's not as sophisticated as what you would find on the iPhone 6 Plus, but definitely not a bad effort, and it's good for doing simple things like asking it basic questions or asking it to do simple application-based tasks. Now, the iPhone 6 Plus is running the all-new iOS 8, which has some cool specific features for the iPhone 6 Plus. So it has actually one-handed mode, so if you double tap on the screen, you actually can lower the whole entire UI, so it's easier or accessible by one hand. Since the phone is not too thick, you can really access most of your traditional things. The other cool thing is that you have dual screen modes for specific apps, so you can view your email notifications and all your different income and all the different messages you're getting in your inbox while viewing the full entire email, which is pretty cool. And obviously another big thing that they introduced last year was the whole fingerprint scanner. And of course it works really well. And it's one of the best fingerprint scanners in the market right now for any smartphone. Now obviously one big elephant of the room is that compared to a couple of years ago, BlackBerry is certainly not the name that it was when the iPhone, for example, first came out back in 2008 and 2007. And these days obviously has some loyal followers, but it's definitely losing market share. And this is really one of the last phones that BlackBerry is counting on to get consumers behind them. And I think the hardware and software has always been really consistent and really well made, and they do a great job in terms of design and overall product experience. And security is obviously number one for business enterprise use. This is really a top-notch phone that'll integrate well with a lot of different enterprise-based applications. And in terms of apps, you're obviously going to get your apps from BlackBerry World, which is their own version of the App Store, and it pretty much has almost 230,000 apps that has been officially approved by BlackBerry. Most of them that you need in terms of Twitter and Facebook, all that stuff is pre-installed, which is pretty convenient, and they integrate well with the phone. Obviously, in terms of selection and variety, there's not really a lot of comparison when we take a look at the App Store on the Apple side. You have 1.3 million plus apps, and every day we have thousands of apps that can do this, that, and the other, and lots of games. And just the maturity we have on the Apple App Store is really uncomparable to what you would find on the BlackBerry side. But overall, in terms of necessary apps, Evernote, and what most people use, you're definitely going to have not too much of an issue on the BlackBerry side. But if there's a specific app that you really love on the iPhone, chances are you're not going to find it on the BlackBerry side. Now moving forward, talking about the cameras, which is a real big deal these days. Pretty much everyone wants the best camera in their smartphones as possible because they're not using the traditional point and shoots, and they're slowly being replaced by really high quality cameras that are in modern day smartphones. And these two phones are certainly no exception. Starting with the front-facing camera, you basically have a 1.2 megapixel front-facing FaceTime camera, which can do 720p at 30 frames per second, and a 2 megapixel camera on the BlackBerry side, which can also do 720p at 30 frames per second. But obviously the real interest is going to be on the rear-facing camera, and on the BlackBerry side, we have a pretty decent 13 megapixel sensor, which has optical stabilization, obviously LED flash, and pretty fast autofocusing. Now, the iPhone 6 Plus also has a decent sensor. It has a larger sensor from last year, which is a 8 megapixel sensor. It also has optical stabilization. That's the only phone of the iPhone lineup that does. The iPhone 6 does not. The 6 Plus does have that optical stabilization. And it also has phase detection autofocusing, so very, very fast imaging taking capabilities on the iPhone. Certainly faster than what you would find typically on the BlackBerry Passport. In terms of video, we have 1920 by 1080 at 60 frames per second on both smartphones, which is pretty fantastic. But the big highlight on the 6 Plus side is that it has slow motion 720p at 240 frames per second, which is pretty fantastic, and not a lot of phones have that. And let's go ahead and take a look at the image quality of the rear-facing camera, so then you can take a look and determine what looks better to you. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about is the overall battery performance between these two smartphones. Now, both of these do not have a user removable battery, and they both have a large capacitive battery as well. That's one of the plus sides of having a large phone, is that you can fit a large battery. In terms of overall performance, the BlackBerry definitely has a larger battery of 3450 milliamp hours, and you can definitely get about 2.5 days if you're conservative about battery uses and just doing basic day-to-day activities in terms of checking your email and looking and surfing the web here and there. And obviously with the iPhone 6 Plus, you have a much better battery than typically any iPhone that you've come across, because it has that large capacity battery inside. You can get easily 25 hours of 3G talk time. That's probably about a day and a half of normal kind of day-to-day usage. Of course, battery life varies depending upon how you're using the phone, what kind of apps you use, and what you overall do with the phone as well. But both are very, very good in terms of battery life. So if you're a power user, I would definitely recommend both these two phones. But other than that, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions about anything I talked about, please make sure to leave that on a comment down below. Make sure to give us a thumbs up if you like the video. That really helps us a lot. And thank you so much. And make sure to check out our other comparisons on our channel if you haven't already. I'll see you later. Take care.